For me, like most people, it began with the love of reading and of knowledge. I absolutely adore learning about things. If I had had a choice, I would have remained an undergraduate all my life. And secondarily, if I could have remained a graduate student, I would have remained there forever. I had no desire whatsoever to go out in the cold, cruel world and work. And I've found that my students and colleagues are much the same. But as far as a practical path, I began as a school teacher in junior high and high school, teaching social studies and English. And I found that I did not enjoy the classroom aspect as it was then, which was much more rigid now than it is today. So I, in essence, looked about and said, I really like schools. I really like kids. I like the whole environment. What career can I have outside of the classroom? Aha! School librarian. They look to me like they're doing everything I like. They're buying books, they're reading materials, they're talking to young people, they're interacting with faculty. It's a fun, happy environment. So I went and got my master's degree, and I was a school librarian for about 6 years in junior high and high schools. I don't know why I left. I guess I got to the point where I felt that had done everything I could do there. If I had it to do all over again, I would never have left, looking back, because I enjoyed it enormously. But for whatever reason, I chose to go back to graduate school, and I found that I liked the graduate school, and that individuals encouraged me to get my degrees and go into library school. So I thought, well, I like all my colleagues, and yes, I probably would enjoy that. So I did it. And so I think I was like 35 or something of that nature when I went in. And so that was quite a few years ago, and I have found that, yes, indeed, this has been a very enjoyable and a very fruitful period of my life. But I have to admit that of all the time periods and of all the work that I've done over a very long period of work, being in the school library itself, particularly the junior high, was my absolute favorite. And if I could make a choice and roll back the clock, I don't think I would ever leave there. Librarians select materials. And all libraries and all information centers select materials. And there is a process of it that begins with the depiction and the putting into place the library's philosophy and the set of objectives and criteria that the librarian and the professional staff are going to use to guide the selection of the materials. So it begins at that starting point. What is the philosophy of our library? What is the thrust of our goals, our objectives? So what materials are we going to obtain and put into our collection that will help our patrons with their information and recreational needs? That's the beginning point. Well, library science and information technology, most people believe have a shared base, but frankly, I would want to sit down and have at least 20 minutes to talk about what information science may be or may not be, because it begins to settled may not be the right word, but contradictory and sometimes questionable as to whether there really is anything named information science. But library science certainly does exist and has existed for at least the late 1800s. And it's the process, maybe process isn't the right word, it is the activities involving some of the basic activities that you would immediately start thinking about. Acquiring materials. So you acquire the materials, which involves selection. You obtain the materials and you have to put them into the library setting. So that means that you have to go through the acquisition process. You have to catalog the materials. You have to get the materials physically on the shelf if they are a book, or if they are an electronic resource, you have to get them into some type of searchable database so that they can be obtained. Then you have to make them accessible, and in the terms of the physical materials, that involves arranging them on the shelves in some kind of logical order, typically a Dewey Decimal. You have to create records in your online computer-based indexes, so that means that you have to do cataloging. And then you go on from there. You have the materials available. Well, then now you need to let people know about them. You need to sell the program. You need to inform individuals of the availability of them, through it be book talks or discussions with faculty or collaboration activities in schools, or literally tens of things of that nature, ranging from newspaper articles to others, to let people know that they're there, that they're available. And then when the individual comes into the library, then you go through that process of, if they're looking for specific information, you go through the process of conducting a reference interview and determining what materials may be most likely to help them to answer their question. If they're looking for recreational materials, you might go through kind of a reader's advisory activity. And all of this is under the general umbrella of developing a philosophy of service. Libraries and library service is a helping profession. It's helping the individuals with their needs, and it's helping, say for example, with the faculty to meet the curriculum goals in the academic library. It's a helping philosophy with many, many, many tentacles. That we literally have 5-6 courses in which we discuss the different aspects of it. Okay. Well, you can't tell that I've been around a long time, of course, because I'm a relatively young-looking fellow. But I think the perception has changed, if indeed it has, in many people's minds, has changed because of the use of computer-based databases. When the librarian dealt only with print materials, they were relatively easy to understand from the patron's point of view. Once the computer-based materials went into place, they're relatively complex, relatively. And the librarian takes on a new sheen, a panache, as being a computer expert as well as being a librarian. And we all know computers are wonderful, they're the be-all. And once individuals begin to view you as not only being a, quote, librarian, but also an individual that understands computers and can get information quickly and can share with you the relatively technical databases, that gives you an additional flavor, an additional sheen that gives them a feeling of, I'm really struggling with the idea of saying that you've become more of an expert in their eyes. And in schools particularly, the image has changed from that of being a very quiet place to one in which young people interact in small groups, and we attempt to create a user-friendly environment, and one in which the individuals are welcome to carry on social and recreational activities as well as educational. And that has changed the image of the librarian a great deal also. Public libraries have existed a considerably longer period of time than school libraries, but I do agree that they share the basic characteristic that they exist to provide the opportunity for self-education. Public libraries particularly came into being in the Western nations as a place where an individual could come and obtain the information and the background and the knowledge to further their professional or their citizenship interests. Particularly in the United States, public libraries have been viewed as the people's university is a term that has been used since the 1920s. And we've had wave after wave after wave of immigrants who've come to the United States who educated themselves and their children in public libraries. In addition to public libraries in more suburban and affluent neighborhoods, public libraries in less desirable socioeconomic areas are the only place where an individual can go in a safe environment, in a welcoming environment, and can have, quote, free access to materials for self-education, for recreation. For those individuals, the free library is just an absolutely magnificent thing. And the school libraries are very, 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 very closely tied to the curriculum. That's why they were invented. School libraries were invented in order to provide materials that would extend and enhance the classroom. When the traditional mode of transmitting knowledge changed from a teacher lecturing and students writing down the materials to one in which the teacher provided the primary method, but students were allowed and encouraged to use additional materials to add to the basic materials presented by the teacher, that's when the school libraries came into existence. So that's their primary role as far as the heart of it, the support of the curriculum. But very soon, it became evident that school libraries could also assist in recreational reading, in cultural activities, and in the growth of aesthetics. So school libraries also purchase and make available recreational materials, usually of a pretty high quality, but sometimes also just for flat fun. Well, what I'm doing in the classroom, and I'm sure my colleagues are, well, I know my colleagues are as well, because when we have departmental meetings, we as a set of individuals, we discuss what it is we want in our curriculum, and we add and change and delete in courses, and we discuss the course content. So it isn't an individual decision as far as the library science program as a whole. It's a collaborative decision, and it does change and modify based upon the needs that we see. We add courses based upon what we feel has been changes in the field. For example, computer-based materials are becoming ever more important every year. So we add additional components to our traditional cataloging classes and our traditional collection development classes, in which we show and lead the students to how to profitably use those computer-based materials. And because we are moving more and more away from print materials, we try and share the, substitute isn't the right word, but the equivalent electronic to keep pace with the technology that one sees in the Google and in the search engines, in the web itself. We present to students the social networks, the wikis, the tools that are now being used for individuals to carry out social activities. So we try very much to keep up with the technology itself, as well as, and this is a very, very important component for our degree for school librarians, the standards and the methods by which schools deliver information is evolving and changing. There was a big change about 5 years ago. Essentially, schools are now required to establish standard curriculums, state-developed curriculums. And school libraries and school librarians need to have the materials and the services and the expertise to help the students and the classroom teachers to help those students reach those goals of those state standards. And that's a very important component and responsibility for many of my classes.